This is The Neutral Position, hosted by Nick Palmisano, bringing honesty and reason back into conversation. Here's your host, Nick Palmisano.
Hey guys, welcome to The Neutral Position. I'm Nick Palmisano, and today I have Ranger, doctor, author, and now developer of incredible supplements, Doc Mike Simpson. Mike, welcome to the show. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Pleasure to be here. Let's see. I am, as you mentioned, I retired from the United States military in 2016. So I'm 57 years old now, still haven't figured out what I want to be when I grow up, which is why I was an infantryman, a demolitions guy, a medic, and a physician. I'm still a practicing physician in the state of Texas. I work as a SWAT doc and an emergency medicine physician. As you mentioned, I own a supplement company called Graybeard Performance because I am a little bit seasoned, as they say, and I identified...
Like a fine wine.
Like a fine wine, exactly. Yeah. I identified that there was a need, Centrum Silver, maybe it works, yeah, but does it work for everybody? No.
You need Centrum Gold.
I need
the next level.
Yeah, I need Centrum Titanium. I got to take it to a higher level. So originally from California, but now a Texan.
Awesome. You've had an interesting life, right? How does one go from Ranger to doctor? That's not a normal transition.
Yeah, and I never would have, if you would have told, Ranger Private Mike Simpson that, hey, you're going to be a doctor someday, I would have just laughed in your face. Like, medicine was so far in the back burner of anything I ever imagined myself doing. No, not to mention the fact that I went to a very small high school. I graduated 102 out of a class of 122, so I wasn't exactly
You smoked 20 people, though.
Yeah,
there's 20 people that you were like, what? Is that all you got?
Yeah, and all of which I think are now in prison.
Yeah.
All of those 20.
But still, 103rd to none.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, that means something.
Yeah, it means something, I guess. So I didn't even take the SAT in high school. I needed to take the ASVAB to go in the military, so I took the ASVAB to go in the military. And I did score pretty good on it, so, which kind of confirmed what my mom had said all along, that, I wasn't dumb, I was just lazy.
Moms are usually right.
Yeah.
If my mom's listening to this, like I'll deny it, but moms are usually right. They usually know their kids pretty well.
Yeah, I'd say my mom is right on everything except politics. So, but I give her a pass for that because she's my mom.
Yeah,
so
she's your mom. So you become a Ranger.
Mm-hmm.
At what point do you say, you know what, I want to, figure out how to fix people?
Yeah, it wasn't for a long time after, because I knew. When I went to MEPS to come in, I wanted the SF contract, and you couldn't get it anymore. You couldn't do it wasn't until years later that they brought the 18 X-ray program. Yeah. Yep. They didn't even call it that in the 80s. It was just, high school to Q course basically, but they did away with it, and a lot of that had to do with, because they didn't have the X-ray pipeline, the percentage of people that were getting, direct to the Q course enlistments, very, very few of them were making it. So they said, yeah, we're going to do away with this. We're going to go back to, recruiting people out of the Army as a whole. So I had a Ranger contract. I'm actually, in retrospect, that was the best thing that ever happened to me. If I would have gone directly to the type of environment on a Special Forces A team, that would have drastically changed my trajectory. But the discipline that I learned as a Ranger Private, courtesy of what some might refer to as hazing, but we preferred to call good solid leadership, really shaped me. Everything from showing up 15 minutes early to everywhere you go, backwards planning everything, an op order just to go to the movies with my kids, everything. And I think it really set me up for success later, to include that I did eventually, when I found my way kind of back to academia. I was able to apply myself better, and I think a lot of that had to do with the Ranger values. But I still wanted to be a Green Beret, and I went, when I finished my first enlistment in Ranger Battalion, I went into 20th Group because that was going to be my avenue, and I didn't know if I wanted to be a weapons guy or an engineer. Ultimately decided on engineer, and did that right around the Gulf War time frame, went to Special Forces Assessment Selection, went to the Q course, went to language school, and then said, you know what, this is really what I've wanted all along. Ever since I was in high school, I've wanted to be a Green Beret. I don't really want to go back to civilian life. I was dabbling in college, and I was a prison guard at night. It's like, no, this is what I want to be doing.
And for those of you out there that don't know what Mike is talking about, if you could just kind of give a very quick synopsis of what does the Q course mean? What does your MOS mean, et cetera?
Yeah. So first you go to Special Forces Assessment and Selection, which is a 3-week course. They don't teach you anything. It's strictly a weeding out process. It's strictly a gut check. So mostly physical, but a huge mental aspect of it. So just imagine 4 hours sleep a night and doing a lot of physical tasks, working as a team, getting really pissed at each other, and that's where the real you tends to come out.
Yeah.
Right. So that's
anger, hunger, and a lack of sleep.
Yeah.
You can't hide who you are. I don't care who you are. You can't hide for very long.
Exactly. And they're testing that through everything from land navigation to, building odd contraptions that involve moving logs or boxes or bags of sand from point A to point B. You finish that. If you get selected, not everybody that makes it all the way through gets selected. At the end, they decide you're what we're looking for. You get selected. Then you can go to the Special Forces Qualification course. And that's where the learning begins. So it's vacillated back and forth over time, but traditionally it's a 3-phase course, which is a field phase at the beginning, what they call an MOS phase, so where you're actually learning your job in the middle, and then another field phase at the end where you're kind of putting it all together. And I was initially a Special Forces engineer sergeant, so building stuff and also making it go boom. So, everything from building bridges, building, what we call TO construction, so building, huts and small structures, and then learning also how to make all that stuff explode. So, blowing bridges up, learning how to where the vulnerable spots on everything from a missile silo to a tank was, so that you jump in a parachute and go and blow stuff up. Then again, phase 3 being the point that you all come together. You've been trained in your MOSs, and they put you on these training Special Forces A detachments, which is the traditional 12-man team. And then they give you an exercise known as Robin Sage, where you go in and you do unconventional warfare. The traditional role of SF is, most people think that SF and Rangers are very simple and are similar, and that, Green Berets are basically just commandos, but actually we're force multipliers. So, our job is to go into foreign lands, and that could mean going into hostile territory and training a guerrilla force, or it could mean going somewhere overseas with a friendly government and doing what we call foreign internal defense. But you're basically teaching strategy, tactics, and individual soldier skills to our host nation counterparts. That's the meat and potatoes of what Special Forces is, which is why we all speak a second language.
So you go through, you pass Special Forces qualification, and then what? We're still not at doctor.
Still not a doctor. So then I went to a team in 7th Special Forces Group.
So far we have you learned to kill people. You learned to blow things up. Doctor.
Yeah. Still a lot of dots to be connected, right? So as a Special Forces engineer sergeant, I went to my team in 7th Group, deployed a few times, was really active in the counter-narcotics war that was, of course, all the rage in the mid-90s.
It's coming back.
It's coming back.
It's getting spicy again.
Yeah, hopefully we recalibrate and do a little better job this time.
Yeah. I totally think we're going to beat drugs this time.
Yeah, gosh darn it. We're going to beat drugs and poverty. We can do this, right?
I'm sorry.
And racism.
It's a terrible thing to
Let's put
at.
racism on the list too. Let's
right.
let's just try to beat everything.
We're going to knock all this stuff out.
We need to tilt at every windmill that there is possible, right? But at one point on a team, there were a lot of factors involved in me ultimately going to cross train and become a medic. First and foremost, I think, was I was so impressed by the medics I was in the Q course with and I was on a team with. I'm like, I don't always feel like I'm the best at being an engineer, but I feel like these guys, the level of training the medics got was just head and shoulders above everybody else. And the medics always tended to be just the guy on the team that you always turn to for stuff. Not to mention the fact that whenever we're going out to do some type of exercise and I had to carry my demo, it was wooden blocks or clay, right? I wasn't really getting to blow all that much stuff up, and I wasn't getting to build a lot of things. So a lot of what I was doing day to day, you know, in the course of a year was notional stuff. Yeah. But the medics were treating real casualties and, you know, seeing real sick people literally all the time. And I'm like, you know,
so they were really doing their job.
Exactly. You know, and you always want to know, you know, it's like, hey, you know, it's like as a soldier, you know, I don't really do my job till I go to combat. Am I going to really be able to do that? And, you know, seeing that the medics, you know, they get to do their real job day in and day out. They're always doing it. And they're trained at such a high level. So I had so much respect for them. And one of the medics on my team was always telling me, because, you know, you're really inquisitive. You're not dumb. You know,
that's such a dude compliment.
Yeah, you're not dumb. Yeah.
You know, a woman would say, "Hey, you're smart," but a guy would be like, "Hey,
you're not dumb.
You're not dumb."
Yeah.
Know?
So and then the implied statement there was, "You're not dumb, like most 18 Charlies." Right? That's what he was thinking, right? He said, you should go to the medic course, and I was like, you know, I enjoy being a Charlie, you know, in spite of all, you know, some shortcomings here and there. But then I started thinking about it more and more, and then ultimately, it was an event in my life that I decided I needed to get away from Fort Bragg for a while, kind of recalibrate and maybe reinvent myself. And somebody said, hey, the medic course is still at Fort Sam. They're not moving till next year. This would be a good opportunity for you to, you know, get out of Carolina for a while and then come back as a kind of a fresh start. And I said, you know what, I'm going to do it. So put the paperwork in, shipped off to Fort Sam, did about 3/4 of the medic course at that time was at Fort Sam Houston in Texas. And then the last part, what we call the med lab portion, was back at Bragg. So came back at Bragg, finished up, and graduated, new MOS, now an 18 Delta Special Forces medic, went right back to my same battalion in 7 Special Forces Group, went to a different company though, and then worked as a medic. And it was during the medic course, and I still remember the pivotal moment that I realized that this really was for me, because initially I kind of decided to do it for the wrong reasons. It wasn't because I wanted to help people. It wasn't because it wasn't a higher calling there. It looks like a really cool mental challenge, right? And I liked, you know, I was one of those guys who watched Jeopardy every night, right? So,
but I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with that.
Yeah, no, there's not. It's, you know, it's, I guess maybe the way I framed it, it kind of sounds like it was.
I have a friend that is, you know, he's independently wealthy. He's a former SF guy, former ground forces guy. He just put himself through nursing school.
Yeah.
He doesn't need money. He doesn't need this as a job. He just wanted to learn, like, hey, I want to be able to take care of people in a higher level than what I learned, you know, in my job.
Sure.
And now he's getting a master's in nursing and doing some specialty stuff. He's literally donating his time to the ER. He's not even like but he just, you know, for him, it's like, I want to develop this. You know, I don't know that if it started selfless or not. It is now, but I mean, you know, nothing wrong with doing something for yourself.
Yeah, and that's what I was doing. Yeah, I was doing it all for all the wrong reasons, and
but I reject that they're the wrong reasons.
Yeah, well, again, the moment that was the turning point for me was it was our very first trauma module test, where you're going to have a full blown patient, a 45-minute scenario.
Real patients, or is this like
simulated patient, moulage, right? You know, key metrics you have to make at the time. You know, I think you had to have 2 large bore IVs on board, and whatever it was, 10 or 12 minutes. You know, primary and secondary survey complete, patient packaged, you know, casualty card filled out. You know, obviously get, you know, all the right cues, do all the right treatments, and patient ready for transport. And it was called Trauma 1, and it was all out of the old-fashioned M5 bag. And the way that it worked is they would put all of us in a staging area behind the building with our bags over our shoulders. All the casualties were out in a field. And so that you would know which casualty was yours, they had another student acting as your assistant. We used to use what is now probably a very politically incorrect term for those assistants. They were called the Hajis. So, and anybody who remembers the old Johnny Quest cartoon would probably know why. So Haji would come and get you and
Yep.
and take you directly to your patient, right? And the moment you got there, your time started. And my Haji came and got me. And again, I hope I'm not getting us in any trouble saying using that term. We ran across the field, and I see my patient, and I got there, and I put my aid bag down, and you had things you had to say as soon as you got there, right? You had to say, is the area secure? And what happened were the first two things you were supposed to say, right? And the grader would say, area secure. What happened? We got ambushed, or something like that. So I did that, and then I looked at the patient, and I said, hey, buddy, can you hear me? And he just kind of moaned. And I said, I'm a medic. You're going to be okay. And the moment I said that, it dawned on me what I was doing. Like I really had not thought about it until those words came out of my mouth. And I was like, wow, like there was like a half a second pause, what seemed like an eternity for me, while the hairs on my arms stood up, and I was like, whoa, this is a big deal. Like, I'm going to have to do this for real someday. And their life really is going to be in my hands. And I actually aced that clinic. I got whatever the max points were, 250, 300. I maxed the entire clinic. And I walked away from that going, this is me. This is the rest of my life. Somehow in medicine, this is the rest of my life, whether it's as a medic, as an EMT, as a PA. I didn't know, but it probably PA at the time, because that's what a lot of SF medics were doing. And it wasn't until, fast forward a few years, when I decided it was time to move on to the next phase. And the Army told me I was too old and had too much time in service to be a PA, that I couldn't even apply. So I had to finish my undergraduate and apply to medical school.
I have a question, because can you explain the difference of like the training for like being a medic and then like going to school for like a doctor's degree and like all that, like getting your master's and finishing like that?
So training for a medic, typically it varies a little bit from service to service, but it's the SF medic program, your didactics of just the SF medic program are, at the time it was 9 months at Fort Sam Houston, then a month of clinicals, and then another 4 to 5 months, or I think it was about 4 months that you did at Fort Bragg, kind of finishing up. It's medic training. The only thing I came out of that with certification-wise that would be recognized in the civilian world on the street was I had an EMT basic certification. So, regardless of what we train medics to do in the military.
But it's a lot more than that.
Yeah.
In terms of skills.
Yeah, it was actually above paramedic level. Because I could do chest tubes, and, I could intubate without medical direction and a bunch of other stuff that the paramedics couldn't even do. So it's a lot more focused and tailored to, it's very trauma centric. Like I wasn't learning how to do things like, give a diabetic their medications. I didn't know how to set up a nebulizer, to give an asthmatic patient or something like that. So very focused, very tailored, and didn't come along with a kind of a civilian equivalent certification, which at the time I felt a little bit cheated. Fortunately, shout out to Campbell University, my undergrad alma mater. It's something that Campbell University recognized. So when I did get my undergraduate degree, they said, hey, we are going to recognize the Special Forces Medic course, and we're going to give you 60 resident hours for it in health science.
Wow.
Yeah, so that was a huge leg up for me in getting my undergraduate degree. But it's another thing I think is different about training as a medic, particularly in the military, is you start kind of the hands-on stuff like very early on, and I think it's that they recognize short attention spans, and that they kind of got to keep you interested. Whereas in medical school, the whole first year of medical school is just a classroom slog, right? I mean, you're not doing, you learn how to about midway through they actually let you put a stethoscope in your ears, but it's all everything, microbiology, biochemistry, anatomy and physiology. So you start to learn a little bit of clinical stuff, like how to take a patient history, but it comes kind of late. And because of that, actually where I kind of was able to shine as a medical student was in my clerkships in my third and fourth year, when I was perfectly, because I'd done it as a medic, I was perfectly comfortable going in and getting a patient history and doing the exam and coming up with a clinical plan and a differential diagnosis. And I at the time I attributed it to I thought my medical school had equipped me a little bit better, because I was doing a lot of rotations with people from other medical schools. But I realized in hindsight I'd been running sick call. I'd worked in hospitals before, so I was just comfortable in that environment.
You were used to people, and you were used to people also in significant, emotional situations.
And I went to medical school at 36 too, so I was
very different.
a little bit more mature.
You take life a little more seriously. And it's not like, let's get through this. It's like, I need to learn this, or
exactly.
Somebody's going to be on the hook for my lack of knowledge.
And academically, that kind of got me in trouble a few times in medical school, because I knew some of the crazy fine details, like especially about neuroanatomy. And I was like, I'm never going to need to know that. Like, there's no test for that. There's no, I don't need to know the difference between white rami communicantes and gray rami communicantes, or the geniculate ganglion. There is no test or what's wrong with your geniculate. I can't even pronounce it now. I don't need to know that. I'm like, there's no, and plus I knew that I was going to, I'm not going to be a neurosurgeon. I knew I was going to be an EM physician. So a lot of things I'd be like, yeah, whatever, because I'm not a very patient person, and I do have a little bit of ADHD. So those were the areas that my grades might have suffered a little bit, because I was like, I know I don't need to know that, so I'm just not gonna put a lot of time in it.
Yeah. So you finish medical school, and then talk about where you head next.
I finished medical school, and I mastered an emergency medicine program in San Antonio at Brooke Army Medical Center, which was a combined Army Air Force program. Residency classes were 16, 8 Army, 8 Air Force, and we split our time more or less evenly between BAMC and Wilford Hall. That was when Wilford Hall ER was still open.
Yep.
We split our time between the two. In retrospect, I was kind of sold a bill of goods that, you absolutely have to go to San Antonio. That's the training ground for special operations, and if you want to go back to the community, that's where you need to do residency. And when in fact that was not true, and based on my background and my pedigree before I went to residency, I could have probably gone to any of the other military residency programs and still made it back to the community without any difficulty. So it is what it is. So.
And when did you ultimately leave the military? Like, and kind of what was the stepping stone? So most people that know you know you from hunting Hitler,
right? From my
post-military, from your post-military stuff. But you had you had an extensive military career. You've basically done everything that there is to do, just about, in some form or fashion.
Yeah. So I went from residency. I went to the Joint Medical Augmentation Unit, assigned to JSOC, and did 6 years with them. And
can you tell people what that is?
The Joint Medical Augmentation Unit is it's a special mission unit that provides direct medical support to all of the cool guys that we make movies about. So, whether it's, Delta Force, Rangers, Navy SEALs, that's when they need somebody to provide them direct medical support, the JMAU is who provides it.
And like, what does that look like in practice? So if you're a layman, where are you on the battlefield?
It's a very small, surgical, what they call a surgical recession team that is, easily deployable. Basically, everything is on your back. Everything is portable in some way, shape, or form. Sometimes that might mean I'm at a secure site somewhere in a building where it's going to be a casualty collection point. Other times that might mean I'm the number 4 guy in a stack, tapping the ranger in front of me that we're going in together, because I'm basically acting as one of the senior field medics in that case, as an ER physician. So you would be that far forward on some of these things. Yeah, that's I've been in the stack going in. I've been I talk about it in the first chapter of my book about the last firefight that I was in Afghanistan. because that's where the need was. So that's where we went, and to pay based on the mission. If we can just, loiter nearby in a helicopter and you can bring them to us there, or be in a secure building nearby, that's one thing. If that's not possible, well, then we need to push as far forward as possible.
So in that situation, are you carrying a weapon?
Mm-hmm.
Or,
yeah,
so you're carrying the entire time, even as a doc.
Yeah, M4, full complement of magazines, pistol on my hip, everything. I didn't carry frags or flashbangs because I was trying to limit the weight, right? Because not only did I have an aid bag on my back, but I'm also was in my 40s trying to keep up with 19-year-olds. So just trying to keep it as light as possible.
And what was it like, kind of you changed roles at this point from, Ranger, SF, different MOS, SF. Mm-hmm. Now you're a full-blown doc, mm-hmm. far forward. Where's your brain during all this? Like, kind of looking at your life and like assessing. Now you got young Rangers and you got Delta guys that mm-hmm. you're looking over. Mm-hmm. I'm curious because I think about this a lot. I got out after, a short period of time in the military, but like when I look at like my son, who is now infantry, mm-hmm. The way that I view it is very different. Mm-hmm. When I was 20-nothing, it was like, I didn't think about like, oh, you could die or, you could get injured. Like it wasn't even something like you knew it's a possibility, but mm-hmm. like you didn't think about it for you. Mm-hmm. I'm very different now. Now I am very cognizant, not only in my friends that I've lost and soldiers that have lost or been injured but mm-hmm. these people are very young.
Yeah.
And you were out there essentially, around my age. What's it feel like to be there and what's the thought process?
It's surreal on a lot of levels. And, there were many times when, taking a knee for a moment and taking a sip of water and you think about, and, thinking about 19-year-old Ranger Mike Simpson. Yeah. And, again, I talk about that in the book that I realized at one point that I was the same age that my father was when I was an E5 section leader in that same Ranger battalion that I was out in the mountains of Afghanistan with. Mm-hmm. And had somebody approached me in the middle of a movement one night and said, "Hey, what would you do if your dad was out here with us?" I would have just laughed. Like to me, my dad was ancient, being in his 40s. So the concept that I was even out there, and then in a lot of ways it was easy for me because I knew that was the environment I had grown up in. Military. The first 17 years of my career were especially as an 18 Charlie, I was always walking point. Or when I'd rotate out with the other Charlie, I was the slack man in the back. Yep. So knowing how to pull security and that the confidence that the Rangers had that we don't have to babysit you and we trust you because we know your background and we've trained with you before. That weighed a little bit on my shoulders, but I don't think I was ever, jumping out of planes, in combat, anything. I don't think there was ever a time where my mortality is what scared me. What scared me the most was knowing that if we take a casualty, all eyes are on me. Yep. And what if there's something I didn't think about? What if there's something that I could have trained this much more in medically, mm-hmm. and I didn't, and that shortcoming cost someone their life? How am I going to feel about that? And there were one mission in particular that I knew, and this was not a mission that I was supposed to be on the ground. But I was going to be the main medical support on a Chinook helicopter with a very, very long flight time to definitive care, much longer than we were typically used to in GWOT. It was going to be an hour and 45 minutes mm-hmm. To get anywhere. And the night before, I didn't sleep a wink because I ran through from head to toe every possible injury pattern that I could encounter. And my biggest fear was running into something that in the first few minutes I realize I am powerless to help this individual. And then I just have the next hour and a half, I'm watching this person die, and just wanting them to fly faster. And that the concept of that just, I don't want to say it didn't paralyze me, but it was really scary. And, I must have, rechecked my med bag 50 times. I was definitely rechecking my med bag more than I was, I was checking my magazines and everything too, but I was definitely, make sure I have this, make sure I have that. Maybe I didn't want to what if myself into carrying a whole Foot Locker with me, but I didn't want there to be anything that I would encounter that
you weren't ready
that
for,
I wasn't ready for
some form or fashion.
Yeah. And I knew, when you're briefing the siege, when I had to be the one to tell the siege assertive commander that I was personally even changing part of the medical plan because I didn't like what they'd come up with on paper, and knowing that if that's not the right decision and we do run into that scenario, that's on me. But I knew it was the right decision. But it's definitely, there are moments and times like that where you step out of yourself. And, there were multiple times that I'm like, is this really happening? Am I really here? Because this is not a scenario.
Doesn't even feel real.
19-year-old me never imagined by the way, someday you're going to be a doctor on a Chinook surrounded by Navy SEALs, even though you're not in the Navy.
Even though you,
Yeah. And you're going to be doing this crazy stuff that people are watching in real time in a room somewhere. And all this responsibility, basically you are going to be the far forward medical authority for all these operators. Like, I just never even imagined that.
I have a question that I've always wanted to ask, and it's only because you guys have both brought up like your age. So you were like 19 when you started, and I know your son. So what are your thoughts, like, honestly, on the military age, like being able to sign up at 18? Do you think it should be higher, or do you think it's like kind of solid where it's at? I've always been curious to hear.
In my opinion, I think it's solid where it's at. Now, where we kind of run into a little bit of problem here is, you always hear you're old enough to die for your country, but you're not old enough to buy a beer, right? You're old enough to buy your country, but, we're talking, you can't, in some states, you can't buy a handgun, right? Well, having been an 18-year-old Ranger private, I agree with, that there are some things, because I think it is appropriate that we mobilize. I don't know why that the line from the movie Taps keeps coming into you mobilize the seed corn, right? The children. But I think that is wholly appropriate. But that's, you got to give an 18-year-old left and right limits. And I think I understand that argument. We should lower it to 18 because of this, because of that, but I don't necessarily agree with it, because I know that my prefrontal cortex wasn't fully formed until I was in my mid-20s.
It's tough for me because a lot of people say, well, then you wouldn't have a military. Like, I don't believe that to be true. But I do think that if we had, if there was a lower supply of people willing to join, that we would have to reconsider how quickly we go to war.
Yeah. Well, there's a whole Star Trek episode on that, right? If you the more palatable you make war and the easier you make it, the more likely you are to find yourself in that situation. And I do think that that's true.
Yeah.
I think if we raise the age, because it's, and I don't think I thought about it until you asked the question, until you said that, but we really do. We catch people during their their gap year time, right?
Yep.
I'm not really sure what I want to do. So, and that's in my generation in the 80s. That's what recruitment was excellent during the 80s, because the economy was good.
Economy was good. Everybody wanted to be part of the Reagan machine, because he was spending real money. It was cool.
Ronnie's Rangers is what they used to call us, and it was kind of ideal, because it's like, hey, I'm going to go off for 4 years, and I'm going to have an adventure for 4 years that I can talk about for the rest of my life, right? It's my parents thought the military was just a phase. I ultimately did 32 years in uniform, so it's kind of a long phase. Long phase, right?
Long phase, but
But you really, I think that's a great time to catch people. And people also, I think, yes, we ask a lot from those 18-year-olds, but as one of those 18-year-olds, I got a lot too. That 4-year enlistment, even if that would have been the only 4 years I ever did in the military, I really feel like it set me up for success in life.
And that's, I feel like, when I went into the military, my intention was actually the opposite. I expected to spend 20 or 30 years in. Like I was all on board. The officer corps kind of let me down, but that's a different story. And I was less fired up about it after a couple of situations. But
you were in at a difficult time, in my opinion.
Yeah, it was a tough time.
Yeah,
because
and you went to Kosovo too, right?
Yep.
That'll curdle your milk right there. I mean, that turned a lot of people off. So,
yeah, it was. Yeah. It was.
Were you under Wes Clark?
I was.
Oh God, I'm surprised you haven't taken your own life. Wes Clark, if you're watching.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah. Oh, that's amazing. No, I loved being a platoon leader. I loved, being close to the guys. Mm-hmm. If I could be a platoon leader or company commander forever kind of thing, mm-hmm. I would probably still be in. Mm-hmm. Even though, some of the challenges were, kind of frustrating. I loved it. Mm-hmm. But, kind of where I was going with this though is like, you really don't know what you're going to get out of it. But yeah. the framework that the military provided really has built structure around my life. Mm-hmm. And, whether we're talking about, entrepreneurship or going back to school or, just how to tackle problems in general, mm-hmm. It's the stay calm, figure out courses of action, mm-hmm. course of action A, B, C. What are hey, course of action A isn't going to be possible because of X, Y, or Z. What are we doing? And having the kind of structure in your life is incredibly valuable, especially when things go poorly. Mm-hmm. You've been an entrepreneur, you know that nothing goes according to plan, mm-hmm. and you're always adjusting. Mm-hmm. There's no, forget about what Ranger Up was, which was, obviously it was a lifestyle brand for the military, but forget that, assume it's any other company. There is no company without my military background. I would not have had the guts, the structure, mm-hmm. Any of those things to go out and do it because, there is something about okay, I'm responsible for the lives of these 40 people. Mm-hmm. It's not going to get worse than this. Yeah. With Ranger Up, with Diesel Jack, with anything I've done, what's the worst thing that happens? The company fails? It's embarrassing? Mm-hmm. That's not that bad. Yeah. That happens to people all the time. Yeah. The worst thing that happens, deployed is you have to call a parent. Yeah. Which fortunately, I never had to do. But, mm-hmm. There were mistakes that I made, and I knew they were mistakes that moment. And, no one ever had to pay for it. Mm-hmm. But, you're in long enough, and you have mistakes where somebody did. Maybe it's not death, but it's something. And mm-hmm. that stress is different than this stress. Mm-hmm.
When I interviewed for residency and you go, you sit in a room, mm-hmm. basically, it's like a little holding room. And then you're going to go interview with various staff, right? And they're all in their offices, right? And they tell you, all right, you're up, go to Colonel so-and-so is ready to see you now. And during one of the interviews, this individual, he was an 06. He actually, he either retired right before that and came on as a civilian, or maybe he was still in 06 when he interviewed me, but when I was an intern, he had gotten out and stayed on his staff. And he was a real snarky individual, real dark sense of humor. And he was one of those people who, would make really open-ended comments, not maliciously, but just to humor. He'd be like, like you'd say, well, where'd you go to undergraduate? Oh, Campbell University. Oh, that's unfortunate. And to just kind of put you off your game.
Yeah.
And none of it was fazing me. I just kept laughing. And he said, what do I have to do to rattle you? And I said, is there a gun in the desk? He said, no. I said, I guess you're out of luck, sir. And then as I was getting up, he said, you know how this interview went, right? I said, yeah, I'll see you next year.
That's awesome.
So yeah,
That's awesome.
it is. It's a totally different framework. Once you've been for that, I've never had to write the letter. I've never had to make the call. I have had to walk to tell a squad of Rangers, and I've had to do that. Once I had to, a patient didn't make it, and I had to go tell the family. And it so happened that an intensivist was in the room with me when I had to. And I think the reason was we had called the intensivist down because this patient had they made it enough, obviously they were going to go to the ICU, right? A really sick patient. And then kind of in the process of us getting the patient ready to move, they coded again and we weren't able to bring him back. So I had to go break the news to the family. And I'm not even sure why he went in there with me. I mean, he didn't, really wasn't even his patient yet. He didn't have to do that.
Yep.
And I went in and I broke the news, and I had kind of a very set way that I would do it and frame it. And one of the things they teach you in medical school is you have to use the word dead. You cannot say he is gone. You cannot say he is passed. You cannot say he's no longer with us, because all of those things are actually a little bit vague, even though in common parlance we know what they mean. You have to use the D word. You have to say he's dead. He died. And I went in and I went through it, and the way that I would typically do it is I would explain the whole process. This is what we identified as a problem when he got here. These were the interventions that we did. I gave him chemicals to try to restart his heart. We tried to restart his heart using electricity. We put a tube down his throat to breathe for him. These are all the things we did. But ultimately, we were not successful. And I'm sorry, but he's gone. He's dead. And I broke the news to the family, and we talked a little bit about spirituality. And I said, I'm going to go get the chaplain to come and talk to you. And as we were leaving the room, the intensivist said to me, he said, I've never said this to him, but he goes, you're really good at that. He said, like, really good at it. And there was a med student there, and he said, if you ever have to do this, and you will, that's how you do it. And it's such a weird compliment to get, right? Yep. It's not something you want to be good at. I'm glad I was. I mean, I hope I made that day a little bit easier for that family. But knowing that you've seen so much death, that you are good at something like that is not something I'd wish on anybody. It's you don't. That's of the things you want to be good at. That's not one of them.
But you stay in this world.
Yeah, it's and I've moved away from working clinically in the ER now. COVID had a lot to do with that because I was working because of all the other projects that I have going on, I was working what they call locums, which means I'm not a partner. I'm not a full-time employee. They identify where the holes in the schedule are. They get me to come down for a few days and work those. And I move along, right?
So how do you get to, of all things you're doing, I mean, you've had this hardcore career. How do you get to hunting Hitler?
Tim was how I got to hunting Hitler. So actually,
Tim Kennedy is who he's talking about.
So I'm sure all of you know. So, Tim did season 1, and I was sitting at home. Season 1 had just finished airing, and I was still on active duty. So I still had a little bit of time to retirement. I had like 4 or 5 months to retire. And I think my wife, Denise, actually noticed and brought my attention to it. So she saw that Tim had posted on his public Facebook page, hey, we are looking for the following. And it was Special Forces or SEAL, speaks German and or Spanish. And they listed a few qualifications that not even every SF guy or SEAL has, some advanced schooling stuff that basically meant you would be comfortable in a civilian clothes environment, being kind of a gray man and going in and interviewing people and stuff like that. And I looked, I'm like, well, I meet all those qualifications. So I shot Tim a text, and I go, hey, man, what are you looking for? And he said, it's for TV. And I said, what do I do? He said, you have a resume? I'm like, yes, I have a resume. So he said, email it to me. So I emailed him the resume. He emailed it to the production company. I interviewed. I did a video interview for the job. They had 4 people going out for it. They eliminated the other 3, but I didn't get the job because the History Channel wanted a taller, younger, better-looking version of Mike Simpson.
Oh, shit.
They didn't say that, but I was able to read between the lines, right?
Oh, that sucks.
And I told him there's no such thing. That unicorn is not out there anywhere.
Yeah. But they always exist in television.
Always in television.
You know,
right?
it's always like, oh, I'm a 23-year-old doctor that has every qualification. I'm the best.
Yeah, and I was modeling before.
Yeah.
You know,
I gave up my modeling career.
Right. I have 6-pack abs, and I'm 6'2" and have a square jaw.
I gave up my modeling strongman career in order to become a doctor, which I knocked out in 1 year.
Yeah. Ultimately, they actually hired a SEAL.
Always a mistake.
To do it. Who immediately had like a family emergency, and they called me back and they said, the SEAL dropped out. Can you do it?
Did they say that?
Yeah, that's exactly what they said. Yeah.
Holy crap.
And I'm like, thanks for letting me know I'm second best. And I was, again, I was still on active duty, so I had to do an OCONUS leave packet and everything, get it approved by the commander. And what's funny is I rushed my OCONUS leave through, which involved 2 country clearances that I had to get because Spain and Morocco were both considered intermediate threat countries.
Yep.
So I had to have MIL group approval to travel to both of those countries and a plan. You know, you have to file I have a plan in case things go bad, right? And I'm in the hospital commander's office with my leave form, and he's about to sign it, and he stops and he looks up and he goes, did you talk to the public affairs office about this? And I said, yes, sir, I did. I'm not going to be in uniform. At no point will they mention that I'm still on active duty, so it's a non-issue. He said, oh, okay. He signed it. And as we were walking out, my first line supervisor goes, when did you talk to PAO? I said, I didn't fucking talk to PAO. I got a plane to get on Monday and fly to Spain. That's getting signed today. Like, this is the Luca Brasi. Either your signature or your brains are going to be on this leave form, sir, when I leave this room. And so I got hired to do 3 episodes. I ended up doing 5. The director and I really hit it off. He liked me, and that's why I ended up doing the Spain and Morocco episodes, and then ultimately doing 2 episodes to include the finale with Tim Kennedy in Chile. Yep. And then they brought me back for season 3. So, and of course, season 3 I was out, but that was after 2016. So I was retired from the military.
So as you know, I wrote about your journey in Tim's book. Like Tim and I spent a lot of time talking about you, and I interviewed you for the book, to kind of get some good corroborating information. Tim will not answer this, but I'm going to ask you here publicly. Did you find Hitler?
No.
Do you think Hitler escaped Germany?
No, I don't.
Wow.
Yeah. And
see that, Tim? Yeah. A man who's willing to take a stance.
Well, and I'll tell you why. And I've taken a lot of flack for this online. So what people don't know is after. So I'm going to say that I don't think he made it out. I think he died in the bunker, but I don't think it matters. I still think what we did in the show was important, and the reason
I do too.
I think what we did it was important because a lot of people didn't know that to the extent to which Nazis escaped.
Because a lot of Nazis did get out for sure,
and and their ideology
lives on,
took root and flourished.
Yep.
And we actually talked about coming back and doing a season 4 that was called Hunting Evil. Not Hunting Hitler, right? Yep. And that got turned down. They didn't want to do that. They're like, no, without the H word in the title, we don't have a hook.
Well, I heard what season 4, the original season 4 pitch was. I won't say it because I don't know if you guys are allowed to, but it got shot down, and because it hit too close to some homes that
it did
that didn't want to get.
There would have been a lot more Operation Paperclip stuff in there that people really didn't want to see.
Yep.
And some other stuff, but basically what people probably didn't pay attention to is something really interesting happened right after we did season 3. And what that was a forensics team got access to the bones that are in the archives in Moscow, which, by the way, between season 2 and season 3, I made several attempts to contact those archives in Moscow. And when they found out who I was, they hung up, told me never to call again, and they hung up on me. Because they weren't big fans of the show, because the show was basically saying, you know, the bones that they have in Moscow are not Hitler's bones, right? And they didn't like that.
Yep.
Well, at the end of season 3, between what would have been season 4 had it happened, a forensics team was allowed access to those bones. They were allowed to do everything except for pulverizing any teeth to check for DNA. But what they were allowed to do was to do a complete 3D reconstruction and compare that to the report that Hitler's dentist had gave them, to include at a microscopic level. So the teeth that they have contained only vegetable matter. Hitler was a vegetarian. There were appropriate wear patterns on all the dental work to show that this was not a body double who they had done the dental work on right after they killed him to make it look the same. All of the dental work matched. There was cyanide staining on the front teeth, as if he had and we know that the report was he put the cyanide capsule between his teeth and shot himself, and then and convulsed at the same time, and the cyanide capsule was ruptured, although the gunshot is probably what killed him, right? So all of these things matched. So is it DNA evidence? No. Is it probably 98, 99% proven that those are Hitler's teeth? Yes. So based on that and a few other things, I think, you know, again, anything's possible.
Anything's possible.
You know, so if they find something tomorrow, you know, that definitively traces him somewhere else. But, you know, everybody on the show, so Tim and I went into it with we're going to treat this like any intelligence gathering thing. Is we are open to anything. We are not here.
He said the same thing.
Yeah,
like he went into it with eyes open, no preconceived notions. We're gonna do a real investigation.
Not here to prove or disprove anything. We report to the commander, and they make the decision.
Imagine a media agency that can make a documentary that qualifies for Academy Award voting. Imagine another that created a Billboard charting music video for Five for Fighting. Imagine another that has raised so much money for nonprofits in its first year working on the Classy.org platform that at the end of the year, it was named as only the second marketing partner in Classy's history. Imagine another firm that can cover your events anywhere on planet Earth and provide a compelling series of videos about those events immediately and to your needs. And imagine another still that can help your e-commerce business take it to the next level. Now imagine that they're all the same business, Diesel Jack Media. Some of you might be saying, hey, Nick, isn't that your company? And to that I answer, can a company like Diesel Jack Media really be owned? Or can it merely be coaxed out like a beautiful butterfly on a spring day? As you listen to this podcast that, by the way, Diesel Jack Media created, you may be asking yourself, what's our secret? It's simple. We try not to suck. Sounds easy, right? It should be. But somehow marketing companies and media agencies always seem to get it wrong. You see, we don't make PowerPoints about doing work. We do the work because we like the work. And if one of our ideas doesn't work, you know what we do? We try another one again and again and again until our ideas start to work. Because not quitting until it's right is at the heart of not sucking. And as previously mentioned, that's what we try not to do here. Diesel Jack Media. We try not to suck. Visit us at dieseljackmedia.com. That is dieseljackmedia.com. So how did that show change your life, if at all?
It definitely changed my life. I mean, I get recognized in airports now, even, not as much right after the show.
It was crazy. Nuts.
Definitely.
That was the biggest show on History Channel.
Yeah. Yeah, which is why they've got it in reruns now, and they put it on YouTube and everything else, because they got a lot of meat and potatoes out of that show.
But like, to me, it's crazy that they didn't have you guys go hunt something else.
Well,
like, it was a winning formula.
Yeah, so I've had a couple of things in the works. I did a pilot for a show that the format of the show was kind of pretty cool. It's basically every week would have been hunting something different, right? So, for example, the pilot that we did was there is accepted dogma on when the first Homo sapiens came across the Bering Strait from Asia and populated the Americas, right? Mm-hmm. But there are various theories on, it could have been thousands of years earlier.
Sure.
Right. So the pilot episode of this show that I was going to do, which was going to be just basically me and an assistant, I was lucky enough I found an archaeologist, anthropologist named David Ian Howe, right? That was going to work with me. Basically, he was going to be like my
where does one find
Robin to Batman?
Anthropologists? Is there a place that you go?
Yeah, I actually just put it up on social media.
Oh, okay. All
yeah.
Right.
So
I thought maybe there was like a secret bar.
No, not there might be.
Yeah.
Yeah. You'd think, movies would have us lead us to believe, college and universities are a bunch of guys with fedoras and whips, like ready to go on a moment's notice, but not the case. Every episode of that show would have been a little bit something different, these rumors about these, the giants here or, Atlantis there, and I was a big fan of In Search Of with Leonard Nimoy back in the 70s and 80s, right? Yep. So it would have been something kind of similar to that, but a little bit more on the ground type stuff. The only thing I hated about it and made me glad the show didn't get picked up was the title was so horrendous. I never would have lived it down.
I need to know.
The Bone Doctor. And I kept telling him, this sounds like a really bad porno. There's got to be a better name. And they're like, no, we've audience tested it. And I'm
people love the Bone Doctor.
And I'm like,
they do.
I'm like, what frat bros did you audience test this with? Because they're bullshitting you. There's no way that people like this title. I'm like, I will never. And I'm gonna have people yelling across airports, the Bone Doctor.
I mean, just to be fair, I would 100% as your friend make all kinds of memes on
I know, yeah, and I'm so for that reason, I'm so glad that show didn't. There was a sigh of relief actually when it didn't get picked up, like for that reason. I had a couple of more treatments. I had I had a show called ERFR that I actually was going to be executive producer on, and that fell through. I got a chance last year to kind of re-pursue that, and I chose not to. I've done one TV project since then. It's on Amazon. It's a documentary, 3-part documentary called Normandy 44 and the Battle for France, which I had a tremendously fun time doing with my good friend James Holland, who's one of the most renowned historians in the UK. He knows, the wool to cotton content on Hitler's underwear. If you ask him, I guarantee
it was well done.
Yeah,
that was a well done series.
I had a lot of fun doing that. But doing TV is just, I liked it.
You don't love it.
Yeah, I don't love it. I would do, if I got an opportunity to be on Yellowstone, I would be on the next plane. Like, I would love to do scripted stuff.
Yep.
Docu-reality is the worst of both worlds. And the reason it's the worst of both worlds is you have a story that you want to tell, but not everybody cooperates with you.
Yeah.
So they're like, okay, you're going into this interview. This is what this person told us in an email, so they need to say that in the course of the interview. Well, once you sit down like this,
it's different,
and they're mic'd up,
yeah,
they don't really want to say that their dad went fishing with Hitler anymore.
That's right.
They realize the impact of that, and all of a sudden they don't want to say it.
Yep.
Or sometimes we're dealing through maybe multiple translators in the lead up to the interview.
Yep.
And you find out that they're not, I interviewed one person who I'm trying to remember who it was. They swore that they saw Borman buried. They were present at Borman's funeral in South America. And in the middle of the interview, I asked this individual when they were born, and I did the math. And not only they were born 5 years after when the theory of when Borman would have been buried in South America occurred. And that basically just, and we spent a whole day getting that interview, right?
And then you're like, what am I doing here?
Yeah, and then you got
to kind of
continue. The amount of unused footage from that show, and we had a lot of great interviews, and we uncovered a lot of, if even if Colonia Dignidad was the only episode we did, we uncovered so much important stuff there.
Raw evil.
Yeah, that alone, right? The things that I saw in Altasee, Austria, finding actual Nazi artifacts in the lake, and what had gone on there, and there's still a lot of sketch there, as far as really the whole. We didn't get to explore this whole thing. That my theory was Kaltenbrunner let himself get captured solely to let Eichmann get away, and why was that, right? And we never really got to explore that in any depth. So there were a lot of things about that show that were really rewarding, and I really enjoyed doing and uncovering for people to see. But a lot of it was just so tiring. And recently I got another offer to be involved in another project. But it was the one thing that, if I had to point to one thing about doing Hunting Hitler that absolutely turned my stomach, it was that every episode had to involve some type of, hey, we're going to use this 21st century technology to go back and take a look. And I got so tired of the technology. It's like, and I kept telling them, I'm like, I don't think the audience cares. And they're like, no, the audience loves it. They want to see the side scan sonar. They want to see the whatever, infrared, whatever. And I'm like, I don't think they care. I think they like it when Tim takes his shirt off and goes swimming. And I think if you look at the ratings, I think it tells you that, right? But there's so much, I don't think I would ever go back and do docu-reality again. Because again, it's like going in, when you do those interviews, it's like you're doing a scripted show, but only one of you has the script. Yeah. I've got the script and you don't. It's like, and you're over here, I really want you to say this, because that would really be awesome. Yeah. And we went weeks at a time in filming that show that we got no usable footage. Got nothing. Yeah. We had all these.
But I also think that was one of the cool things about it, is that it wasn't like you were paying people to say bullshit
absolutely
things.
Not. Yeah,
and the producers never crossed that line. So you and Tim both said that. Where
and people that accusation flew around. Yeah, that we were they're paying people to say whatever. Yep. And I can say I'll swear on a stack of Bibles right now, we did not pay people to say things that were untrue. We didn't stage things. Yep. There was, what you saw was what you saw, and the answers that we got were real, and many times from eyewitnesses who were, children at the time, but accurately relaying what they saw.
So, you've gone on, from that, you've got a whole other career, but one of the things I wanted to bring up is that when Save Our Allies, an organization that I'm a board member of, when Ukraine was like on the eve of kicking off, we wanted to get, some medical staff there. You were the first person that both Tim and I recommended, and you were asked and you said yes. And next thing you know, this is before it was the spicy thing and everyone was getting over there. Right. You were on a plane, to Poland, and
real quick. Like I landed on the same day that of the peak refugee traffic, actually, that we've had. And I think that number was 22,000 in a day, or maybe even a little bit more. I used to graph it like literally every day. So,
what motivates you to do that at this point in your life? Because I'm not saying that you're not a spring chicken. Yeah. But you don't have to do this stuff anymore.
Yeah. I was watching, like you and Tim, we all called that invasion months in advance. Right? The writing was clearly on the wall. Yep. And I had multiple conversations with my wife about how this was going to go down. And nobody knew. I think the whole world, to include Vladimir Putin, underestimated the resolve of the Ukrainian people. Definitely. We also didn't know what their level of equipment and preparedness was. The Ukrainian military had never been tested to any real extent, so we didn't know. That's, and the prediction. I'm not gonna. I'll go ahead and name names. So, Milley's prediction about what was going to happen in Ukraine he was equally wrong about Ukraine as he was about Afghanistan, but in the opposite direction, right? Oh, Afghanistan's going to be fine. It's not going to fall. Okay, no, not what happened. Ukraine, and then, the Kiev's going to fall in 6 days. Also wrong, right? So we were watching this on TV, And then as it ramped up,
I think most people, in his defense, I don't remember a single talking head. Mm-hmm. I don't remember. I mean, I literally don't remember a single talking head that said anything other than Ukraine's screwed. If they last 2 weeks, it's going to be they'll be lucky.
I think everybody thought it was going to be a Crimea all over again, walk in the park.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that's fair. That's fair. I did single him out. He and I have a history, but
I'll leave you guys to that history. I get a lot of crap because I always defend General Milley on Afghanistan. The reason for that is he was literally, the one beacon of light that was helping.
Yeah, and we know that now. That he was having phone conversations with organizations like Save Our Allies, and I do think I give credit where it's due. He didn't have to do that.
We would not have had the ability to move the people that we were able to move without, his office clearing manifests.
Yeah, because ultimately they had to be the one that said yes or no.
Yeah, we did not have the power to do that. Without going to jail.
Yeah, or trying to overland caravan people.
That's right. So he was fighting a fight that he was not allowed to win. Yeah, I'll say it like that. And you know what I mean by that.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
But you guys have your own thing, and
I try not to. Again, we have a little bit of a history, and there's a lot of things I dislike about the guy, but I would never. I try not to demonize him. I don't think he's not the Antichrist.
We are all fallible.
Yeah,
I mean, not me, but other people.
Yeah,
other
people as a whole. Yeah, but Tim texted me, and it was not, will you go to Ukraine? It was not, will you go to Poland? It was not. It was, we are looking for, medics, physicians, nurses, to probably work in a refugee care role. Please send me any names of anybody that you know. So I read the text, didn't answer right away.
He was just fishing. He was doing one of these.
Yeah.
He was like,
yeah,
he knew. On.
He knew.
Come on.
Tim knows me well enough.
Just a little nibble.
Yeah. I got out of
me. That was me setting the hook.
Yeah, I hated that. It's
okay. I was already thinking it, that I should go, and especially, and I was thinking that from multiple angles, is I know I'm going to be comfortable there. I know a lot of people who would see this and want to do it have never been off a linoleum and out from under fluorescent lights, and they're going to be totally useless there. I'm like, I don't like, disaster. I've always kind of shied away from disaster medicine, and that because it's not exactly my wheelhouse. People think there's a lot more. If you do the Venn diagram of tactical medicine and that type of thing, it's actually not as much overlap as people think.
What are the differences? So what happens in disasters that is different from
speed
from
being
trauma?
The big thing is you have control. If you have control of the battle space in a tactical scenario, it's we get in, we have a specific objective, and we get out. In disaster medicine, there are so many factors that you cannot control.
It's languishing.
Are they
stuck in a building?
How protracted is this going to be?
Are there lines of? Is it overland, and how long is it? Because the roads are blown up. Okay, that
and
makes
there's
sense.
and in a tactical, going in exactly what your resources are. It's not I'm going to get there and then I'm competing for resources. Now I'm trying to get, hey, I need a favor here, I need a favor there. I mean, you do a little bit of that in the tactical realm as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of horse trading.
And I got to say,
especially at the beginning, there was a lot of horse
trading.
A
lot of it.
It's and who has what? Yeah. We need this. Can we get, if you give us this tent, we can provide this service. Yeah.
And I know, having done a little bit, kind of having my toe into that realm before, I know a little bit about the personality-driven aspect of it and the I want credit-driven aspect of it that we see from a lot of NGOs. Saw a little bit of that yesterday, and a guy who got up and was beating his chest about everything that he's doing in Ukraine. But when I got the text...
And it is tough because organizations need to fundraise.
Yeah.
But they also don't really need to crap on other people,
Right.
in order to do that. But
Yeah.
they still tend to.
Well,
Like,
but I give SOA a lot. So two organizations I'm going to give huge props to. Save Our Allies, obviously, right? Because you don't crap on other people.
we do not.
Right? You know, you can scrub SOA's social media. They're not crapping on anybody. And Global Response Management, which I worked very closely with, and we had an MOU when I was over there.
Yep.
Also, very upstanding organization that doesn't crap on anybody and does amazing work and doesn't pat themselves on the back too much. Same as SOA.
Yeah.
You have to do a little bit of it because you have to be. If people don't know what you're doing, you don't get funds, right?
You've got to tell them what you do. It's tough though. So for example, when Sudan kicked off, like we sent a team. We sent a 4-man team, very skilled in NEO. We couldn't announce we're doing this. And then, once they got on the ground, they assessed, and this was in conjunction with the military. It was like, at first we thought it was going to be non-permissive. And for the first day or two, it was non-permissive. So these guys were getting ready to, to insert in earnest and start pulling people out. But then after a couple days, basically both sides said, we don't want to involve the West. So they essentially announced, like, if you're a Westerner, you're fine. Go ahead and get out. We are not going to mess with you.
Yeah.
And that, for the most part, that was the case. And so then, we received, hey, we think we don't need you. Stick around for a few more days. And then after a few more days, it was like, we feel good about our ability to get out anybody that wants to get out without breaking any international laws as a military, because the military can't do everything.
Right.
They can get the embassy people out, but beyond that, it's a little blurry.
Yeah.
But once both sides in that conflict kind of said, hey, we're going to leave the Westerners alone, then
it's like they're playing street hockey. Car.
Yeah.
Everybody moves on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, we spent a lot of money.
Yeah.
We spent a lot of money doing that.
Yeah.
And it was the right thing to do, because if we were needed, our team was there.
Yeah.
And we were going to get Americans out, and
Yeah.
our teams are willing to do things that maybe there are organizations like us that would, but the military can't do for a number of reasons. But we have to be there every time something might happen in order to be effective. And there's a huge expenditure, but you don't fundraise off of that. It has to be quiet.
Yeah.
And so, we can talk about it now, but not, like, the moment's over, there is no fundraising, but we still had a huge expenditure. So it's, one of the things people don't think about when they're thinking of nonprofits is it's actually very hard to keep an effective nonprofit going. If you don't have, like, a significant number of high wealth individuals that are essentially just making it their private mission.
And they need, and they want to know where their money's going. You can't say I go places and I do things with people.
You can't.
Yeah.
No, you have to tell. You have to let them know what happened.
Yep.
But yeah, it's very challenging, and there are a lot of great people. I've met some phenomenal human beings, but I've been in two dirty industries. Apparel is dirty and disgusting. It doesn't sound like, I know that sounds weird, but it is a very cutthroat, people throw each other under the bus, do anything to destroy each other kind of environment. Film is worse.
Yeah.
But those two pale in comparison to what the NGO nonprofit world is like.
Oh yeah.
I mean, oh my God.
Yeah.
Like,
I could name a couple of organizations specifically that are over there lying about what they're doing.
Oh yeah.
Taking credit for other people's work.
Dramatic.
Simultaneously shitting on everybody else.
Buses full of people that, like, don't actually need to be evacuated.
Yeah, among other things. Among other things.
Yeah.
It's we can get into this in a second, but there was one specific incident in Ukraine where an organization lying about what they were doing almost got people killed. But no, I knew, when you guys asked me to do it, without asking me to do it, I got the text, and I spent 45 minutes drinking coffee, getting up my courage to ask my wife, Denise.
Sure. Yeah, I know that feeling.
And I said, so honey, I got a text from Tim this morning. It's, what would you think about if they need medical care for the refugees in Poland. What would you think if and that was all I got out of my mouth, and she said, of course you're going. What do we need to do? How soon, and what do we need to do?
I just got chills.
And
Sorry.
I mean, that's how my wife is amazing, and I am what I am because of her. And she was my rock through all of it, through all of the planning. And you know, the phone calls, and I wasn't getting a lot of sleep because, you know, same type of thing. I'm laying in bed at night, you know, we're gonna need this, I need to talk to somebody about this, and, you know, taking notes on the nightstand.
Yep.
And video calls.
My wife also tried to get rid of me in a similar fashion.
Yeah,
you know, when I was like,
yeah.
Hey, what do you think about? Go.
You're still here?
Yeah.
That type of thing. But you know, and initially, you know, there was a lot of unknowns initially, and, you know, that's why there was a lot of talk about me going basically almost directly into Ukraine. Mm-hmm. Like, we're gonna have somebody pick you up at the airport and we're going across, right? And I was like, well, hold on, pump the brakes, because I know how these things work. And when the tide of humanity is going this way, the odds of me being there and then being a person that needs to be rescued are very, very high. Mm-hmm. I'm like, we need to get the lay of the land.
What's
first.
the plan?
Yeah, what's
Who's
the plan?
Here? Yeah.
Yeah, so I spent a lot of time when I got there going to meetings, and I got plugged in with the UN meetings. I got plugged in with what they called the community meetings, which, you know, we had a U.S. military presence over there. So I was, you know, getting the briefings and seeing what was really going on, going to the refugee centers, talking to the refugees who were coming out, talking to the people there on the ground, and identifying the needs. You know, because I got some really vague messaging early on. Like, before I ever left, I got a call from one guy who somebody gave somebody my number, who gave it to somebody, who gave it to somebody else. And it's like, this is a doctor, former special forces guy, doctor, he's going over there. And he goes, hey, as soon as you get here, I need to get you in Ukraine. The medics need a lot of help. And I go, what does that mean? And he said, what do you mean? I said, need help could mean anything from I need somebody to help me carry a litter to I need a CAT scan machine. There's a lot in there.
Yeah. What is the help that's needed?
So me being
non-specific.
Yeah, let's find out what that means,
so that you can actually be useful.
Yeah.
Like, if I'm going to Ukraine and the reason is there's a bunch of people with amputations, I need certain equipment.
Yeah, and that's why I spent almost 3 weeks in Poland, going Warsaw, Krakow, Rzeszów, back and forth, before I was like, okay, we've got enough information here. We have the lay of the land. Now I'm ready to cross the border and talk to the Ukrainians and walk through this hospital and see what they have.
Yep.
And see what other people are doing. And then we'll do that. And I'm glad we did it that way, because knowing how many people kind of ran in willy-nilly and ended up retrograding very quickly.
Yep.
You know, and that's and
they were gone shortly thereafter.
Yeah,
as opposed to establishing a real world mission.
Exactly, because they went in best of intentions. Let's move forward and plant the flag.
Yep.
And realized that they were a hindrance in the battle space.
Yep.
They were not only were they not a help, they were another thing to worry about.
Yeah.
And we saw a lot of that.
And what we've learned over time is, like, what value is it to be in Lviv? I mean, really, versus Poland. Like,
you're essentially in Poland.
You're essentially in Poland.
Yeah.
Like, no one's getting, no one in Lviv is in trouble.
Yeah.
It was a different.
Yeah. We can talk about, Malcolm Nance LARPing all over Lviv and going to the coffee shop every day and, pretending he was doing something.
We stopped in Lviv for like half a day waiting for, a train to get to Kyiv and move on from there. And Lviv was like, I mean, it was great. I had some of the best borscht I've ever had in my life. Like, it was like I was almost on vacation in a European city.
Yeah.
And like,
I was drinking a cappuccino during an air raid. I mean,
Yeah. But people are sending, pictures during the same time of Lviv, like, I'm in Ukraine right now. Like,
you're in Lviv, dude. Yeah.
No one's messing with Lviv.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not saying that there's no threat.
No,
there
they did, a lot of Brits got killed in Lviv,
Yep.
and that was, again, these are a lot of the mistakes that were being made. And that was another thing is, I wasn't prepared. I was not going to cross the border with this, right? Because this is a tracking device.
Yeah.
So, got a Polish burner phone.
Yeah.
Logged stuff into it in code, and had a secure method to communicate with people. And this stays, on this side of the border in airplane mode, and this one goes forward with me.
Yeah.
And and that's the way that it's going to be. And but a lot of people didn't do that. And that's and I'm not going to mention who they are because I don't want to give them publicity, but there's a kind of a fly-by-night NGO over there that likes to do a lot of Instagram posts and pat themselves on the back and make a lot of bullshit claims. And they were over there saying they were doing shit that they weren't really doing.
Sure. Yeah.
In Lviv, in the nurses' lounge at the pediatric hospital in Lviv, claiming it was somewhere else, making a lot of Instagram posts to get likes. And they got targeted because of it. Oh, wow. And there's some douchebags. I don't really care if they get a missile up their ass, but they were going to get a lot of other people killed too.
Yep.
And basically what happened is I got pulled aside by somebody on active duty who was probably risking their career by having the conversation with me, saying, I don't know if you know these guys, but this is what's going to happen. Somebody needs to get word to them. Mm-hmm. So I got word to them, and for my trouble, they blocked me on social media, and but they did delete the posts. So
I guess whatever.
Yeah,
so that's on them.
Yeah,
that's on
it's
them.
If I wasn't following them anyway, so if you block me, I don't get to see your bullshit douche bro posts, and some lives got saved. I don't really care. So
people are weird.
Yeah.
So you get back from Ukraine, and recently you've both written a book and launched Graybeard.
Yeah.
So talk to me about those things.
Yeah, so I wrote a book called Honed, Finding Your Edge as a Man Over 40. Something that I realized, as I said, I started med school at 36. I was an intern at age 40. And my whole goal in going to med school was I wanted to make it back to the soft community. And I wanted to be at the tip of the spear. And I realized, I hit age 40 right after going through med school, not PT in the way that I used to. I gained a lot of weight in med school, gained weight again in residency. I realized that, that in my 40s, my body wasn't like my body was in my 20s and 30s. And
it took you to your 40s to realize that?
Yeah, it really did. Yeah, I guess, maybe it was denial, but
even
through my 30s, I was always one of those guys that, I could not work out for a pretty long period of time and then
and just pick it up.
I would have a 2-week period of what I call blowing the gunk out of the carburetor, and I'd be good again.
I was that way also. No longer the case.
It was actually I realized before I got out of residency and went to the unit that things were a little bit harder for me. And then right around 2012 timeframe, when I moved from Bragg to Texas, but I was still in the unit, I realized that it was even more difficult, that it took a lot more effort. So I started doing the research. I'm like, I have all this education in what makes a body work and what works and what doesn't. So I need to put that to use. So
what's the big takeaway? Give us the 2-line version.
The big takeaway, I think, is patience and wisdom, and embrace that. Is don't recognize that you're going to have limits, and don't rush, and avoid shortcuts. Shortcuts pave the way to injuries. That's all they do. Don't be in a rush. And I would say, if I had to sum it up in one phrase, it is prioritize longevity over performance, and then you will get performance. Right? If your eye is on, I'm going to the gym today because I want to be in excellent health 10 years from now, then your performance is going to improve. If you graph your performance, you're going to improve. Because what most of us do is we work out real hard for something and then we lay off for a while. And we do this sawtooth pattern if you were to graph it. Yeah. And you want a steady state, right? Upper level, but not going down, right?
Yeah.
And that was also about the time, I had started a podcast and I'd got some notoriety from Hunting Hitler, and I had gone on another podcast and I, talked on various things, and I would get these emails and these questions about, hey doc, I'm about your age and I have this, and what about back pain? And what about sleep? And what do you think about, what supplements are good and what should I be eating? And what do you think, what's your opinion on CrossFit? What's your, keto, vegan, carnivore, so I was getting asked my opinion. So I was all constantly researching this stuff. And then I said, I'm going to put it all in a book. And that way, when somebody asks me, I can go read my book. And I don't have to retype this same email 20 times.
You bring up a good point, though, because I would say, except for this last time that I was just telling you about before the show where I hurt my knee dropping into a fireman's carry I've done 1,000 times in my life and somehow hurt my knee this time. Typically, every time I've hurt myself, I start really getting back into shape, start feeling a little good, I want to get back to where I was at my peak, which I'm never going to get to again. It was too long ago. And I just know that I don't have, my 20s peak in me at this point. But, and you bite off more than you can chew. The shoulder's feeling a little tweaky, but you go ahead and put 250 pounds over your head on a military press anyway, and then it's really tweaked, and then your neck hurts, and then oh crap, now I can't lift for 3 weeks because it. So I just you wanted to do that extra rep you would have done at 20-0, and instead you now are going almost a month without being able to, consistently. That is what I've done. So I've made a few rules for myself that have helped me generally avoid injuries. Good. I no longer will 1 rep max. Period. Yeah. I don't do it. It's if I don't think I can do it 3 times, I don't do it. Yeah. And that way, if I do just get 1 because I was more tired than I expected or I had a bad day or whatever, I'm still not in that optimal pushing, trying to overdo it mode. Yeah. And so since I've done that, I haven't had any major injuries lifting, for example. And then, when I run, I will wear a heart rate monitor, even though I hate it, even though I feel like I should be running faster. If it's a day where I'm supposed to be in yellow, I'm just in yellow. And that might mean that I look embarrassing running, even though I can run much faster, but I'm saving that for the day where I'm supposed to go faster and I'm supposed to be, peaking at the edge or red or whatever. Yeah. That's hard. Yeah, it is. Because I used to be a real runner. And so in the back of my head, I'm I can run this. Yeah. But,
You got to be smart about it. Yeah. And I even, I've had the distinct pleasure of, I know you do jiu-jitsu, a lot of your audience probably does too. And I've had the honor and privilege of doing a little bit of training with John Danaher, who's just amazing. Yeah, he's a machine. Yeah, he's not, I won't say Jesus because that's sacrilegious, but he's John the Baptist. Yeah. Okay? And, I talked to him about, John's not quite my age, but, he's had some health issues. And I talked to him about that. And he said, Doc, the most important thing for you is you need to know when to say no. No to a training partner. No to a specific move. Or even no to an entire training day so that you can rest. And
that was a pretty good dinner.
That's pretty. I've been working on it for a while. Yeah. When he's saying it to you,
you're in the moment.
Yeah, you're in the moment. You're totally in the moment.
You got the eye contact, and you hear Dreamweaver playing.
Yeah.
Whoa,
once
Dreamweaver.
Across the training room, John Danaher yelled out to me, "Beautiful double leg, Doc," and I'm like, "This is the greatest day of my life." My kid's being born somewhere down here. I got a compliment on my double leg from John Danaher. My life is complete. But it's all about patience, and you do have to know when to say no. To say today's a rest day, or today, And I talk about that in the book about how important recovery is that I never embraced in my younger years. Yeah. Because recovery takes so much longer, and doing deload weeks, not just for your muscles but for your nervous system as well, and doing proper rest and recovery, getting enough sleep, knowing.
I'm terrible about that.
And it's
I'm terrible with sleep.
Talking about doing things you're not supposed to do. One of those things would be going to Ukraine for 2 months when you're bone on bone on your right hip and your last cortisone shot has run out and you're in excruciating pain, and then you come back and 3 weeks later you're getting a titanium hip replacement, which I did.
Yeah.
And I'll still do a 1 rep max, but like I had to do, before my hip replacement, I was doing 305 on deadlift. I did 2 weeks ago, I had to do a 1 rep max because my coach made me do it, and I did 295. I probably could have put more weight on and done 305. But I'm like,
what's the point?
What's the point?
Yeah.
I'm not.
I do feel that
my
way.
name's not going on the wall.
I do feel that way about lifting now. When I used to be a big lifter, I cut weight from the age of 11 for judo all the way till the age of 21.
Wow.
So I had this period of time where I could not be big. And so then when I finally was done having to cut weight, I was like, I want to see how big I can get. So I had this like 5-year, like how jacked can I get? And I was I got up to 230 pounds, still in the military, 230 pounds.
Wow.
Still making my max in my run. And I could deadlift over 6. I could squat over 6, and I could bench 465.
Dude.
Doc, I'm surprised there's not a sinkhole in his garage.
Yeah, right.
I had so much weight in his garage.
Tore my pec.
Yeah.
Minor.
Yeah.
But
you're lucky. Yeah.
But it was the scariest thing.
Yeah.
And I also realized I was rolling, which had always been easy for me. Like I always could just, even though I wasn't really a jiu-jitsu guy at the time, like it had entered my vernacular because again, we're older. But I would roll, like essentially what I did was more of like a judo catch wrestling hybrid. But so I was rolling with some guys that I was much better than. And I was exhausted, and I was like, all right, combination of the minor pec tear, which was the scariest thing that had happened to me at that point, and just being too big to be athletic.
Yeah.
Like it was just too big, but it was fun. I'm glad I did it. I'm glad I could see like how big could I get. It was just too big to actually be able to do athletic things.
Yeah. No,
So I cut back down to 194, which was that was the best weight I've ever had. It was like a good mix of like I'm big enough to hurt people and I'm small enough to still be athletic and limber and whatnot.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I think I'm 180 now. I do best like right around, most of my life I weighed in the 150s, most of my adult life. I would fluctuate typically between 150 and 155. The lightest I've ever weighed, I got down to like 142, and my body fat was below 10%, and it wasn't really maintainable for me. It was just too much work, and I felt like I was cannibalizing myself all the time. But I've been up to 200, and and not a good 200.
Yep.
Resident med school and residency 200. It's not a good feeling. And I got a couple of years ago, I got up there again. I got up to just shy of 200, but I was still working out. But I got to, definitely I keep it 180 or below, but now at this age, at 57, I kind of perform best between 165, 170, 175 is kind of where I perform best. So
I wrestled at 143.
Yeah.
So I spent a lot of time cutting weight, and it was just nice to be big for a change.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, like I said, I was walking around at 143, and I'm 5'6". So, had I ever wrestled or fought, it would have been 135-ish. Yeah.
You probably would have been a 20, 25.
Yeah. Because I could, that's how much water weight that I could have shed, in a pinch if I needed to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't miss those days.
Yeah.
I miss the sport. I miss being like a peak athlete, but I don't miss the cutting at all.
Yeah.
And like, I don't let my kids do it.
Yeah.
My kids have all wrestled. None of them are allowed to cut. Like if they're like a pound over or something, like that's different. Like you make the weight that you agreed to.
Sure.
But, I would be, my senior year, I was 171 after football.
Yeah.
And I wrestled 40.
Yeah.
And the year before that, I was 167 and I wrestled 30.
Yeah.
It's too much.
I've heard these horror stories, guys I know that were wrestlers, about going to wrestling meets and their coach gives them a cup on the bus to spit in.
Oh yeah, I did all that.
Just you're
Yeah.
you're ditching saliva
Yes.
on the way to weigh in.
I used to put I used to get bags of Skittles, and I'd put 2 Skittles in my mouth because the sugar would generate saliva, and then I would spit that out, and I could lose, depending on how dry I was, between like a quarter and a third of a pound per bag. So I'd have like a stack of bags because it was better than running.
Yeah.
You know, so I'd just be sitting there like chew 2 Skittles, get the saliva going, spit into a trash bag for like the entire hour trip to wherever we were going.
That's crazy.
It sucked. So terrible.
Glad I never did that.
So dumb. Yeah, I don't let any kids do that. I don't like any kids I coach, my kids, like, you're not cutting weight. Like, train hard wherever you land. That's where you're wrestling.
Yeah.
Period. All right, so you are now author, entrepreneur. Is there anything that you wish I had asked you that I have not asked you?
No, not that I can think of. I mean, the only thing we didn't talk about graybeard a whole lot, but
you can tell us more if you want to talk about it more.
Just tell us why it's better than Simpson, Doc.
Yeah, so Graybeard Performance is it's a life and lifestyle brand. It's primarily supplementation is what I deal with, and it's
what if you have gray but have no beard?
Yeah,
I'm not talking about anyone in particular.
Yeah, so no, there's people that I have customers who are on a prescription basis for my supplements that are in their 20s and 30s, and there's nothing in there. I market to men over 40 who want to be what I call warrior athletes. Like you're not sitting on the couch and you're fishing is the only cardio that you get. You're going to the gym, you're doing strength and fitness. The same people that read my book are the people that I want to take in my supplements. Sure. You're doing jiu-jitsu, you're doing either CrossFit or some type of strength and conditioning. But anybody can take it. I have women. There's a 60-year-old woman who is on a every 30 days gets a delivery of all my supplements, and she absolutely loves them, and she's always emailing me telling me how great they are. The problem with the supplement industry, and I'm keenly aware of this as a physician, is there's so much crap out there that does absolutely nothing, right? And a lot of doctors that you ask, they'll say, "Oh, it's all bullshit. Like, you don't need to take any of that." And there are studies out there, and they always flaunt the studies, right? But what the studies don't take into account is the studies are for people that are eating what they should be eating, right? They're not eating on the go. They're not pressed for time. They're eating a healthy, balanced diet. And they're also usually not looking at people that are in that warrior athlete category. They're looking at your run-of-the-mill people, right? And the proof is in the pudding that, you go into any NBA, NFL locker room and you open up a locker, you're going to see whey protein, you're going to see vitamins, you're going to see fish oil, you're going to see all this other stuff. And there is good clinical data for a lot of nutritional supplementation. So what I kind of made my mission starting years ago was to eliminate the wheat from the chaff, right? Go through and say, well, what works and what doesn't work? What's hui and what's, does uña de gato really work? Does turmeric really work? What do the clinical studies say? So I spend a lot of time on PubMed looking at those studies, looking at what really works and at what doses. And does it do all the things that they say it does, or does it only do this and that? And I started going to places like Vitamin Shop and GNC and kind of piecemealing it and trying it out for myself, after reading the clinical data. And I figured out the thing, I really did feel a lot better when I was taking turmeric every day. Little things like that. I really did have more energy when I took some B vitamins, or had a little bit of caffeine in some type of form before my workout. I did sleep better when I took valerian root and magnesium. But again, I was piecemealing all this stuff. And then finally I was like, this is expensive. Yep. And you have one or two choices. Either you buy a whole bottle of just one thing that's probably overpriced, or you buy these comprehensive, Centrum or, multivitamins, one a day, whatever. And 2/3 of what's in there you don't even need. You're paying for colored urine is basically what you're paying for. So what's the point? And I'm like, you know what? I'm going to make supplements that have clinically proven ingredients, naturally sourced, and have what you need in the amounts that you need. And I'm not throwing a bunch of other stuff to make you pee chem lights that you don't need. And the fact that you're peeing chem lights shows you don't need it, right? Because you're just flushing it right out. So that's what I did. And I started with my longevity formula, which was all about healing and immune support and recovery and anti-inflammation. So it makes you feel better every day. Mm-hmm. It makes you less likely to have to skip a day, and you recover more quickly and more efficiently. I started with that, and I added an energy formula because that was I was looking at what the most common things were for people. Recovery impairment, right? Especially as we age, and lack of energy. I work all day and I just don't have the energy to go to jiu-jitsu in the evening. So I end up skipping class. Okay, what can I do for that? I don't like the pre-workouts. They're most of them they hop you up way too much and you crash at the end. Yep. So I came up with something clean and I made my energy formula. And then I've always had trouble sleeping, so coming up with a sleep formula was an easy step for me. And then because of me kind of focusing on this space, I started to go outside of my bubble and I started to look at things like, what is the data behind things like cordyceps mushrooms? And does it really help your oxygen carrying capacity? Well, yeah, it looks like in studies it does. And then I took it myself, and anecdotally it did work. So that's something that I'd like to add. Mm-hmm. Finding out that there's stuff out there like L-citrulline, things that will relegate things like nitric oxide, right? Knowing that upregulation of nitric oxide is how Viagra works, right? So it's we think of it as this is an erectile dysfunction pill, which it is. But originally Viagra was made for pulmonary hypertension, right? So to help your vessels be at the proper state of relaxation for oxygen transport. So it works not only with sexual performance, but also with athletic performance. People don't necessarily realize that in the right doses, right? Finding something natural that can do the same thing and finding that it had clinical results behind it, that gave way to my vitality formula, which ended up being one of my more popular supplements, right? Because as soon as you tell somebody it's basically a natural Viagra, they get very excited. But the vitality formula is not just that. And I do have female customers who take my vitality formula specifically because they want the athletic performance aspect out of it. And it provides that. And my next thing I'd probably add will probably be a good naturally sourced whey protein at some point. That's a little bit down the road, but I get great feedback from my customers. The naysayers look at my stuff and they're like, oh, it doesn't have hardly anything in it. Yeah, because I only use stuff that works. It's like imagine if your company fired everybody who's not really pulling their weight. How many people would actually be working there? Well, that's what my supplements are.
That's awesome. That's awesome. It's we talked about it a little bit, but you said it keeps growing, even though you're not investing a ton of time into marketing it. You're basically just making stuff that you think is good and letting word of mouth kind of, rule the day. And, that's pretty wild to see it continuing to grow.
My one of the things, I don't do real good at getting customers, but my conversion rate from somebody being a one-time purchaser to now I'm on subscription. And, looking, I check my stats every day, like today, a guy buys one of everything every 30 days. And this is his 18th order,
That's huge.
So, seeing something like that makes me very happy. Yep. Got an email from a customer yesterday. I was telling you about this before we aired. Hey, doc, did you know that your energy formula is also a hangover cure? No, I didn't know that. Now I know that, right? And it makes sense because I've got a lot of stuff in there that'll, help with headaches, make you just feel better. There's B vitamins in, you used to hear in the 60s and 70s, rock stars that would get B vitamin shots all the time, right? Because they're living fast and loose and staying up all night and they needed energy boost, right? Well, I've got B vitamins in my energy formula, so of course it makes you.
You heard it here. Yeah. If you take Graybeard, you will be a rock star.
You'll be a rock star. Don't forget it.
One thing everyone needs is furniture. Unless you're the kid from The Blind Side who somehow never had a bed before Sandra Bullock kidnaps him. And when it comes to furniture, no one expects anything less than perfection. At Balish Woodworks, perfection is the only thing they sell. Each of their pieces is handcrafted, custom designed, one-of-a-kind, heirloom quality, and all 100% made in the US of A. From natural wood slab tables, live edge tables, custom jobs for office, home decor, and accessories, they've got it all. Check out Balish Woodworks today to get your very own one-of-a-kind piece to display for all your guests. They'll be so impressed they won't even care if you burn the hamburgers. All right, time for the rapid fire questions.
Okay.
Madam,
Yes.
send them down.
Oh gosh, they're in a hat and everything.
They're in a hat. The first question, though, that I always ask everybody, what is the toughest animal you think you could defeat in hand-to-hand combat?
Toughest animal I could defeat in hand-to-hand combat. Let's see. All bears are completely off the table. Most dogs are completely off the table. I think if I got a possum's tail, I could swing it and give it enough head trauma that I could win that.
So you don't think medium-sized dog, you have a good chance?
No, absolutely not. Yeah, absolutely not. Yeah. A medium-sized dog will fuck you up. Yeah, I don't want. Plus, I love dogs.
I just want you to know that we've had people say that they would defeat an actual lion, not even a mountain lion, but like a lion.
That's insane.
I know.
No, so
I know how insane that is.
When I was a kid growing up, I remember I had an aunt who read the National Enquirer. So whenever we went to her house, there was always copies of the National Enquirer. And I remember reading a story about some guy who went to Africa solely to climb a tree with a knife taped to his hand and fight a lion in a tree, and supposedly killed the lion. Supposedly. I mean, it was a National Enquirer, so who really knows?
I'm going to go with probably not.
Probably not, right?
Probably
but this
not.
was the story, right? And the guy looked. This was the early 1980s, so he looked exactly as you would imagine.
Yeah.
Big Marlboro man, mustache, right? Overly hairy chest, posing with the knife.
400 pounds of solid muscle with knives for teeth.
Yeah.
And knives for hands.
Yeah.
Feels like I probably wouldn't win.
I think the lion got pissed and fell out of the tree, and
like
that's what
broke
killed
his
him.
neck, or they shot it.
Yeah,
Or they shot
more likely, right?
And then he was like, "I did it. I'm a hero."
Or maybe somebody drugged the lion for him, right? Because they didn't want the tourist to get killed.
What's your go-to karaoke song?
So I so wish that I could carry a tune. My voice sounds like a bag of cats getting thrown through a stained glass window. So I tried to karaoke one time and do a Frank Sinatra song, and just the sound of my own voice in the speakers made me stop. I walked away.
So I guess you're not going to sing 10 seconds of a song for us.
No, I can't. I'm sorry. I can't. I wish I could sing.
We'll just keep walking.
If there was one thing I could say, if there's one talent you wish you had,
singing.
I wish I could sing. Yeah.
How many 7-year-olds do you think you could fight before they'd overpower you?
How many 7-year-olds? What time of day is it?
Let's say noon. High noon.
Okay. So they're a little tired. Might be a little hungry. So that changes. So I was going to go with 5, but I'm going to go with 8.
I feel like you could definitely take more than that.
Yeah.
I mean, I have an 8-year-old right now.
Well, because
I feel like I could defeat an infinite number of him.
Now,
and he's a scrappy kid, but I mean, he's 8.
So here's the deal. If this is scorched earth.
This is scorched earth. This is
I can kill them
to the death.
Oh, okay. 15.
I feel like you're really underselling your ability.
You have to get your mind in the right place. You kill children first. That's the reach.
Yeah, I'm gonna get tired. So I would beat a motherfucker with another motherfucker in this case. So I would grab one of them by the ankles and just start swinging
smacking
at the rest of them.
That's a good strategy.
Yeah.
All right, we're gonna move on from this because I feel like Quigley is upset.
Because they're all fighting me at once, right? They're not lined up single file, right?
Yeah, it's like a group of 7-year-olds.
Yeah,
it's a
15.
group.
I'm gonna go with 15.
Okay, all right. What's the most interesting place you've ever been
to? Interesting place I've ever been to. Huh. Wow, that's a tough one because I've been a lot of really cool places. The Catholic Church in Montserrat, Spain, is one that immediately came to mind. On the drive home, I'll probably think of someplace else. No, it's the Wailing Wall in Jerusalem. Because it was so powerful for me. It was so powerful. Like you can feel, when you stand there, you can feel that generations of people have come here with tears in their eyes and bared their soul. Mm-hmm. You can literally, people might say I'm crazy, but I honestly feel like you can feel the spiritual and psychological energy of that place. maybe it's just my preconceived notions going into it.
Either way, though, it doesn't matter.
But to me, that was pretty monumental.
What's one job no one could pay you enough to do?
I wouldn't go back to being a prison guard for all the money in the world.
You're not the first person to say that.
Yeah.
You're the first person to say that on the show, but that's what's been your favorite age so far?
Every year is my favorite age. I know that sounds like a cop-out question, but every year I'm happy to be here.
What's your weapon of choice in the zombie apocalypse?
Weapon of choice in the genre would be my Barnes Precision Machine 16-inch barrel M4 that I have a Timberland variable power scope on top of, a Burris Timberland variable power scope on top of, because it requires no batteries, so it'll never go. I literally built it as a zombie gun. So this
is the most specific answer we have ever received.
So I have 1 o'clock iron sights on it.
Yep.
So again, and they're 1 o'clock iron sights with tritium, so I can use them as a CQB rapid acquisition sight, right?
Yep.
And the scope is such that I can see farther than I can shoot, and that's important not as much for zombies, but for fellow human beings, so I can see, is he carrying a radio? Is he carrying a gun? Because I always want to be able to see farther than I can actually engage targets. It's got a long barrel on it. It's a little bit loud because I have a MySelects compensator on the end, which is loud, but it's a total tack driver. I've seen Tim. I don't know if you asked Tim this question.
Tim has not been on yet. We haven't had him
I
on.
saw him get asked the exact question. I think it was on The Fighter and the Kid, and he said he wanted an AR-10 because of 7.62. I don't think I can make heads explode all day with 5.56. So I think for zombie purposes, I think a 7.62 is unnecessary because the rounds are going to be heavier.
Guns heavier.
Yeah, and plus 5.56 is just for battlefield recovery is just more easily acquirable.
I would say this is of all the answers that Doc Simpson has provided today, that was the best.
I want to caveat that. So there used to be
there is a time limit on these answers.
Oh, sorry.
Sir.
No, there used to be a thing called the zombie run and gun, which was a 2-gun trooper class match that you would go out and do in Davila, Texas. They're not doing it anymore, and that was like the whole reason that I got that gun put together was to compete in that, right? And that was all my logic going into it. So
did they cancel the event because it's no longer
last question?
No, they canceled it because the guy that used to run it had a heart attack.
Question. Yeah, we should end on that question, but I'll ask this one anyway. Who's the worst teacher you've ever had?
The worst teacher I've ever had was the microbiology teacher. It was a microbiology or biochem. It was the biochem teacher when I was in medical school. I think her last name was Dunn, and the problem is she's a bit of a savant with photographic memory, so she doesn't understand why you don't understand it. So she was incapable of teaching biochemistry. I had one of those. Completely incapable. I had a math teacher as an undergrad that I actually had to drop out of college algebra and retake it for the same reason. He was Rain Man.
Yeah.
So he didn't understand why you don't see the numbers in your head. So so oftentimes geniuses are the worst teachers.
I took a class once called Advanced Heat Transfer over an Amorphous Mass, and let me just tell you,
I'm asleep already.
Let me just tell you, I was not smart enough to have this guy as a teacher.
Yeah.
And none of us were, except for there were 2 kids. Mike Nordine and Brian, I'm blanking on his last name right now. They were smart enough and the rest of us were not. Mm-hmm. And it was hell. It was just a hellscape. And this guy was so smart. The teacher was so smart. He just thought none of us were trying. Like he really thought.
Yeah. He's like, why don't you get it?
You know, and for those that don't understand, I mean, essentially like it'd be like something like this, and it'd be like, all right, there's a lighter here, and the lighter's been going for, 32.6 seconds. Mm-hmm. How hot is it here? Mm-hmm. And you're like, and you gotta build the formula that's going to tell you that. Mm-hmm. That was the class.
Yeah.
as you can probably guess, not super easy.
Yeah.
And he was just like,
why don't you get this?
I mean, clearly you just needed to apply L'Hopital's equation to the, to this, and then use the heat transfer formula here, and then bro,
Yeah.
I got nothing for you.
Yeah, the college algebra teacher I had that was the same way. Again, the biochem one was worse. It was way worse.
Yep.
But the math teacher was like, he would draw on the board and he would say, okay, so we know this is this. And I would raise my hand and I go, how do we know that? We don't know that.
You keep saying nosotros, but I think you mean two.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, is there a mouse in your pocket? Because I don't just know that.
Yeah, I don't know shit.
Yeah.
That's why I'm in this class.
We were doing polynomial equations, which to this day, I don't know what those are even for.
I can help you with that. I got that.
Yeah, because that's it. So to me, oddly enough, I was told by a math teacher one time that the math problems that people have the most trouble with are what are called it's called a one-job problem. Are you familiar with that term? Mm-hmm. So if Nick mows a lawn in an hour and a half and Mike mows a lawn in 45 minutes and they mow a lawn together, how long does it take to mow the lawn? Yeah. Those were always easy to me because I understand what we are figuring out.
Yep.
How long it takes to mow the lawn, that's easy. Yeah. But if you're like solving for X, I got to know why I give two shits about X or I'm just not invested in this.
So I generally like math. Generally, I like it, but when my brain can't even wrap around how to map the problem, that's when it's hard. It's like literally did not even know most of the time how to even start. Yeah,
you got to have a starting point, or it's pointless.
But really enjoyed this conversation. We went all over the place. You are welcome anytime. That was Dr. Mike Simpson, Ranger, Special Forces, entrepreneur, hunted Hitler, creator of, all kinds of things.
I'm a pretty good salsa dancer.
You're an interesting character. He can dance. He cannot sing. Mike Simpson, thanks so much for being on the show.
Thank you, brother. Appreciate it.